The Year of the Black Pony by Walt Morey, Chapter 10. Things at home certainly were not the way I wanted them, and it was partly my fault. Besides splitting the house down the middle and holding rigidly to her rules about this marriage of convenience, Ma was stiff-necked toward me. I couldn't blame her. We had always been very close, but now I could feel the distance between us growing wider than the top of Christmas Ridge. I didn't know what to do about it. I couldn't tell Frank to take the pony back to Sam Fletcher. He'd worked for a week without pay to get the animal for me. I was sure that giving me the pony was a little like slipping backward through time to when he'd been a boy and dreamed about a certain white horse. It was like making his dream come true. I couldn't spoil that. But I certainly didn't like the gulf developing between Ma and me. At moments I wished I'd never heard of the pony, but the next minute I wouldn't give him up for anything. I was real mixed up. I tried to follow Frank's advice, fed the pony, talked quietly to him, stayed close where he could get used to seeing me, but I didn't handle him in any way. Frank returned to work at Fletcher's. The job would last 2 or 3 more weeks. I went to our old place about every 3rd day, so there was plenty of time to be around the black pony. I spent a lot of it watering and feeding him small amounts of hay and a little oats. I sat in the hay in front of him and talked in a low, intimate voice. He got so he'd stand and watch me with those big dark eyes. The way those sharp ears pricked forward, I was sure he was listening. Once I tried to reach out and touch his face, but he jerked his head away. About the 3rd day, I tried to hand feed him. I let him eat all the hay in the manger, and then I talked to him several minutes to get him good and quiet. "You're sure no good for anything the way you are. I've got to make you useful for something, but you've got to help me. I don't blame Ma for not wanting you. If I can break you to ride, maybe pull a buggy, she might change her mind about you. But I can't do it alone. I'm not going to hurt you. You've got to understand that. Now let's you and me get started knowing each other." I held out a handful of hay. He backed off, snorting delicately. "Come on," I said. "It's just hay. You know that. There's nothing to be afraid of." Maybe he wants something else. Hay's all he's been getting the past 3 days. I had no idea how long Ma had been standing behind me. I said, a little embarrassed, "Frank said I should talk to him, that it'd help him get over being afraid or nervous." "Of course," Ma agreed, "and as long as he is nervous, you should tempt him with food he knows is mouth-watering." "If I had some sugar cubes," I said. "He wouldn't know a sugar cube from a stone, so he wouldn't touch it. Now if you had a carrot. You brought some home the other day. Run up the house and get 3 or 4 good juicy ones with the tops on." I ran and got the carrots. Ma held one at arm's length and moved up slowly to the manger. She said quietly, "This isn't hay. You know this is good. Come and get it. You know you want it. I've seen your kind before. My father was very good at handling horses like you. Come on." The pony looked at the carrot, snorted, and tossed his head, but he stayed the length of the halter rope away. Finally, he came up a step at a time, stretched his neck, lifted the carrot, and ate it greedily. Ma put another carrot in the feed box. He ate that. The 3rd she held at arm's length. "Come on," she coaxed. "Take it." He came a step at a time, stretched his neck, and nibbled at the green top. Ma handed me the last one and said, "You do the same, no more." I held out the carrot. He took it. "There," Ma said, "step number 1. Take your time and work slow and easy. This animal's been abused plenty." "Can I give him some more?" I asked. "A few, but go easy. We need them for this winter. Those corn stalks at our old place should have some sweet, juicy suckers down near the ground. Why don't you bring some of that home for him?" She studied the pony. "Have you named him?" "I've just been calling him the Black Pony. You got any ideas?" I said hopefully, thinking that maybe she was beginning to give a little. "A couple," she said. "My father had a horse like this one. He didn't keep him long, though. He called him Satan." Her lips had become straight and tight. "That certainly fits this animal. Or you could call him Useless. That fits, too." I said, "I'm sorry, Ma. I'm awful sorry." "So am I." She leaned against a post and folded her arms. "It would be different if we were well off. You know how we're scratching and scrimping to get ahead. Right now we need every bit of feed and every penny we can scrape up. The hay this animal eats could save several heifers or fatten a couple of steers. I don't have to tell you that could mean vitally important cash. I didn't dream Frank would ever get him, I said. He did it for me. If I turned him down now, it'd be like a slap in the face. And you don't want to turn him down? No, I said miserably. Ma walked to the door. The gulf between us is wider than ever. You don't like calling him Satan. All right, how about calling him Lucifer? It's not very original, but it fits. It fits in more ways than you know. How do you mean? Lucifer was an angel, but he led a revolt of the angels in heaven and fell from grace. Then he became known as Satan. But he had been an angel, I said. That's right. I doubt you can make an angel out of this animal, but you can try. She went out and closed the door. Right then, I'd given almost anything if I'd never heard of the black pony. For several days, I tried a variety of names on him, but for some reason, Lucifer stuck. Maybe I couldn't make an angel out of him, but at least I could try. Ma always said you climbed a mountain one step at a time. My first step was to get those fresh, tender green corn suckers and a few more carrots from the garden. I fed him the carrots first. Since he'd tasted them and wanted more, he took every one from my hand. Then I started in on the corn suckers. He took them too. I kept talking to him. I talked about everything. School and harvesting, hay, the trouble between Ma and me that I was to blame for, that he was to blame for, what a good pony I was going to make of him, and a lot more I don't remember, anything to keep him listening to my voice. Soon he'd stand quietly munching suckers while I fed them to him one at a time. Finally, still talking and feeding him with one hand, I reached out and put the other on his neck. It felt like silk. I ran my hand up and scratched carefully at the base of his ears. He stopped eating and stood perfectly still, but he didn't jerk his head away. I wanted to do more, but I was afraid to push my luck. I dropped my hand and fed him the last corn sucker. Excitement was boiling in me. I said, "You don't know it, but you and I are going to be great friends, and I'm going to ride you. You can count on it." When Frank came home, I told him, and he said, "Good, let's try taking him out and let him drink from the trough. Maybe we can let him get a little exercise in the corral." He tied a lariat to the end of the halter rope and carefully backed Lucifer out of the stall. The instant he saw the open door, he bolted for it. He made it into the corral, and there Frank snubbed him to the big snubbing post, sunk deep in the ground. He fought the post for a few minutes, but Frank kept talking quietly to him, and he soon quieted down. Then Frank led him to the trough, and because he was plenty thirsty, he drank. Afterwards, Frank stayed close to the post so he could take a fast wrap around it. He let out the lariat almost to the end, and Lucifer circled, snorting and dancing and tossing his head, getting his first exercise since he'd come here. I didn't know anyone else was around until Ellie said, "Gee, he sure is pretty running, isn't he, Mama?" Ma and Ellie were watching through the poles of the corral. "Yes," Ma said, "he is pretty." Frank let him circle around until he began to sweat. Then he shortened up the lariat and took him back to the barn. That was the pattern of the next couple of days. By then I could walk right in and pet him, and he stood quietly. Then the corn suckers gave out. That evening Frank let me back Lucifer out and lead him to the watering trough. He drank long and steadily, and I stood beside him, a hand on his glistening neck, proud as the king of Siam. When he finished, he turned his head, and those nostrils sucked in a good long breath of me. Then he blew mightily, showering me. Frank laughed. "I think you've got a friend. I told you he was smart. Try leading him around." I walked him around the corral, and he was at my heels like a dog. After the third lap, Frank said, "Take him inside and tie him, and we'll see how he reacts to currying and brushing." He jumped at the first touch of the curry comb, but after that, he loved it. I'm sure he'd never been curried before. "Take him out tomorrow," Frank said. "Do it 2 or 3 times and walk him around the corral, but be sure the gate and barn door are closed. Don't try riding him, understand?" "When can I try?" "I don't know. We're going to take this a day at a time." He stuck a straw in his mouth and studied Lucifer. Riding him could be a long way off, if ever. But look how tame he's got in a few days. Walking up to him, petting him, leading him around, currying him, and feeding him is one part, the simple part. He likes that. Riding him is something else again. The second a man hits his back, he'll remember spurs and whip and yelling and excitement. That's when he'll start to fight. It's all he's ever known. They tell me he's piled up most of the best riders in the valley, so you stay off him until I give the word. Concentrate on getting his confidence and friendship and nothing else. I worked on that. I walked him around and around the corral, fed him the choicest bits of hay, curried and brushed him until his coat glistened, and talked to him by the hour. When I went to our old place to hoe and water the garden, I took him along. I walked the whole distance because I was afraid to try leading him and riding Nellie. I had no trouble. He paced along beside me as docile as could be, turning his head every so often to blow his breath at me, and finally to nibble delicately at my shirt with his lips. When we returned, Ma asked, "Did you have any trouble?" "No," I said. "He was as tame as Nellie." "Don't be fooled by that, Christopher," she said sharply. "Don't trust that pony." "But, Ma, Ellie could have led him." "I don't care. Don't you trust him." The next day, we headed out across country into the open range. It was warm. We dropped into a small valley where the grass was lush and the creek made a wide bend nearby. I held the halter rope, and Lucifer fed a circle around me, seemingly completely content. Then I decided to try something. I dropped the rope and let him go. He kept ripping out grass. When he wandered off, I went over and picked up the rope again. He just lifted his head with a mouthful and looked at me. I dropped the rope, stretched out in the shade of a bush, and looked up at the cloudless sky. It was utterly still, except for the steady snipping of grass, the hum of bees, and a single meadowlark's clear voice. I must have gone to sleep, because I became conscious with a start. Lucifer was standing over me, blowing his breath in my face. I knew then I'd never have to worry about him running away from me. For the first time, I thought seriously about riding him. If I could ride up to the house, Ma would realize he was a good working pony, a valuable addition to have on the place, one who'd earn his keep. Then, I told myself, she'd get over her peeve at me, and that wide void between us would be gone. I thought about it all the way home, and I especially thought about it lying in bed that night. The next afternoon, we returned to the same spot. It seemed like such a logical thing to ride him today. It would be a wonderful surprise. I let him feed for a while, figuring a full stomach would somehow help. Then I picked up the dragging halter rope. I petted him and rubbed his ears and talked to him. "They say you're an outlaw. I don't believe it. When we ride up to the house, we'll prove it to Ma. We'll prove it to the whole valley. You know me. You know I wouldn't hurt you for anything." I ran my hand along his sleek back where I'd sit. He glanced around, then calmly went on eating. I petted him some more. Then I led him to a rock that jutted a couple feet above ground. It would be easy to mount from there. I stepped up on the rock, got a good grip of his mane, and said, "Easy, boy," lifted my leg over his back, and carefully slipped on. He looked around, surprised. The next instant, his ears were back and his head down. I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but I was sailing through the air, and I'd lost my grip on the halter rope. I think I turned a complete somersault. I landed with a bone-jarring crash flat on my stomach again and began plowing up the sod with my face. It shook me up plenty and knocked the wind out of me. I lay there for maybe half a minute getting my breath back and feeling for broken arms and legs. Everything seemed all right. I turned over and sat up. Lucifer stood about 10 feet away, head down, looking at me curiously. I got up, picked up the halter rope, and led him back to the rock. He seemed perfectly calm. I'd mounted too slow, I told myself, giving him too much time to think about it and be ready for me. I petted him again and talked quietly to him. Then I stepped to the rock and onto his back in one quick motion. Before I was even settled, he seemed to explode under me. His back was humped, his head down between his feet. I think I stuck for about 3 jumps, and then we parted company. I plowed into the ground again, but this time I was ready for the shock, and it didn't seem to hurt quite so much. Once again, Lucifer just stood there, ears pricked forward, watching me curiously. I didn't get up quite as fast, but I did get up. I meant to try again. Lucifer tossed me twice more. The last time I don't remember landing. I must have been knocked out for a minute or two. When I came to, I was lying flat on my back and something wet was running down the side of my face. I raised my hand and felt stickiness. Then I looked at my fingers. Blood. I turned my head. Lucifer was calmly eating grass about 20 feet away. I sat up gingerly, and then I saw the small rock. Apparently, I'd hit my head on it when I landed. I started to get up and fell back with a groan. My right ankle wouldn't support me. I could feel my foot swelling inside the shoe. I got the shoe and sock off and looked at it. It throbbed like a toothache and was already beginning to puff. I couldn't move the ankle, and there was no way to tell if it was broken or not. I pulled the sock on, but already I couldn't get the shoe on. I wasn't going to walk home on that foot. Lucifer wandered over, nickered, and put his head down and blew his breath in my face. I patted his head and said, "You sure fixed me up good. We're in real trouble now, and we're both to blame. I shouldn't have tried to ride you, but you had no call to buck me off. Ma's going to throw a grade A conniption fit for sure this time. But it'll be tougher on you because she's dead set against you anyway." I sat there aching and feeling very bad about the way this had turned out. Lucifer wandered off and began eating grass again. My foot and ankle were on fire. If I could get to the creek and soak it in the cold water. And I must have a lot of blood and dirt on my face that needed washing off. I explored for the gash on my head and found it very near the hairline. It had almost stopped bleeding. It was about a quarter mile to the creek. Maybe if I could find a broken limb I could use for a crutch. But we were almost in the middle of the meadow. The first bush was a couple 100 yards off, and that was low and scrawny. Maybe I could hold on to Lucifer's mane and hobble to the creek. I crawled to the rock I'd used for mounting, pulled myself into a sitting position on it, and called Lucifer. He came to me. I gathered up the halter rope, took hold of his mane with the other hand, and pulled myself upright. I tried to touch my foot to the ground to help. Pain cut like a knife. I held to his mane and began to hop. I managed about a dozen hops, then sank to the ground again. I'd have to wait right here until Ma or Frank came looking for me. I glanced at the sun. It would be a good 3 hours before they missed me enough to begin worrying and come looking. Lucifer went back to eating grass, wandering idly back and forth near me. I held my handkerchief to my head until the bleeding stopped. My head finally quit aching, but my ankle was giving me fits. It seemed like the sun took forever going down. But finally, long shadows spread across the ground, and the cool of evening began driving the heat away. Frank rode into the meadow on Nellie. He spotted Lucifer and came over. He slid off and bent over me. "Well," he said, "you're kind of messed up. Don't bother telling me what happened. I'll tell you. You tried to ride Lucifer after I told you not to unless I was there. Why?" He seemed so tame. I wanted to prove he was good for something and wasn't just eating hay and grain that we might need for the cattle in winter. I wanted to surprise you and Ma. "You're going to surprise her all right, but you haven't me very much. I was afraid this might happen." He examined the gash on my head and said, "You got a nasty little cut there, but the blood on your face makes it look worse than it is." Then he examined my foot. "It's not broken, but you've got a pretty bad sprain. I can't take you home looking like this. It'd scare your Ma half to death. Give me your handkerchief. I'll soak it in the creek and wash you up a little." It only took a few minutes to go to the creek, soak the handkerchief and mine, and wash me up. "All this happened in just one try?" he asked as he worked on me. "I tried about 4 times, I said. Frank shook his head. "You're a glutton for punishment. You could have broken your neck or your arms or legs." Lucifer came near and stood watching. "I should have let Fletcher shoot you," Frank said, grumbling. Soon as I was cleaned up, Frank boosted me on Nellie, and leading Lucifer, we headed home. "This is a fine kettle of fish," he said. "Your Ma's going to land on both of us this time like a ton of bricks. There was no excuse for this." "I wanted to show you and Ma," I began. "You wanted to show your Ma," he cut me off. "You didn't have to show me." I could have told him I also wanted to bridge the widening gulf between Ma and me, but I didn't. At home, Frank led the horses up to the porch and tied them to the post. He practically carried me into the house. Ma took one look at me and headed for the pan of water and towels. Frank went to put the horses away. Ellie asked immediately, "Did you get in a fight again?" "No," I said. I told Ma what had happened while she worked on me. She didn't say a word until Frank came in. Then she lit into both of us. "I knew something like this would happen when you came home with that useless chaos," she said to Frank. "Fletcher knew what he was doing when he sold him to you. Whatever happened to your good sense, I'll never know." "Ma," I said, "it wasn't Frank's fault. I wanted Lucifer. He got him from me." "I don't care about reasons. A grown man should have better sense. As for you, you almost got yourself killed trying to ride him." "You sure did," Ellie piped up. "Gee, your face is a mess." "Ellie," Ma snapped, "that's enough. Whatever got into you to try such a crazy stunt? Did you really think for 1 minute you could break that animal to ride? An outlaw that's pitched practically every good rider around. He seemed so tame, I said lamely. I was sure I could. There, you see, Ma said to Frank. I want that animal sold and sold now. Mabel, Frank said quietly, nobody in the valley would buy him. You know that. Then give him back to Fletcher or shoot him. I won't have him around. Lucifer is Chris's horse, Frank said in that same quiet voice. I'm not going to give him back to Fletcher, and I won't shoot him. Then I will, Ma snapped. I'll not have Christopher maimed for life. If Chris is maimed for life or killed, you'll be as much to blame as the horse, Frank said bluntly. Ma's head came up like a rattler about to strike. That pony can be broken to ride, I'm sure of it, Frank continued. Chris rushed it today for one reason only. He wanted to prove to you the animal was good for something and wouldn't be just a liability eating hay and grain this winter that we might need for the cattle. Ma looked at me. Frank told me not to ride him yet. I said, I wanted to show you how good he was. Some of the tightness went out of Ma's lips. Then she began winding a bandage around my head without saying a word. Frank said, now, I'm going to try to break this pony to ride, but I'm going to do it my way and in my own good time. Do you hear me, Chris? Then if I can't, and only then, will I think about either trying to find a buyer for him or disposing of him somehow. With that, Frank picked up the milk bucket and headed for the barn. I sat with my foot in a pan of cold water all evening. The swelling didn't seem to go down, but the pain did. But I couldn't put an ounce of weight on that foot. When I finally hobbled to bed, I felt about as good as anyone could who'd been tossed sky high by Lucifer 4 times in a row. Everyone had turned in but Ma, and she finished setting the table for breakfast and was about to go to bed. She stopped by me on her way to her room and said, Christopher, I want you to know it was not just the hay Lucifer would eat that was worrying me, but exactly what happened today. I was afraid you would try to ride him eventually, and I'd seen what he did to other riders last year. He was a devil. The thought of you trying frightened me out of my wits. She pushed a lock of hair out of my eyes and smiled. Remember, you're the only man I've got. Ma, I said, you've got Frank. It popped out. I think I was as surprised as she was. We don't discuss that, she said, not now or ever. But he likes you, I said. She shook her head. Maybe someday you'll understand. She bent and kissed me quickly and went to her room.